Okay, so as it turns out, obscure movies that were only released in Japan are kind of hard to find good footage of. I did eventually get my hands on some, but as you'll see, it features some not atrocious subtitles, but kind of sketchy subtitles. I don't even actually know right now if any of that's going to make it, if any of that's going to be clear from the video, from whatever clips I'm going to use. But I just hope that's not a deal breaker. Transition. You know what there's not enough of on this grand old internet of ours? Adaptation nerd rage. What an underserved market. Beloved property after beloved property getting modernized and commodified while making absolutely no splash in internet discourse whatsoever. Boy howdy, I'll take any other timeline just to see this happen, even one where, I don't know, people's overreaction to a movie is way funnier than the movie itself. Okay, I'll cut the flippancy, but only because sometimes adaptation nerd rage is justified. I, personally, have no shortage of umbrage with almost every stage-to-screen musical adaptation ever made. Seriously, Tom Hooper, why would you shoot and edit your lame-ass movie like a f***ing Hurt Locker, you medium illiterate hack? The King's Speech wasn't really that good either, are people still defending that one? Okay, so the universal connective ground, regardless over whatever petty squabbling happens on the internet, is that video game movies are bad. Everyone agrees on this. The fact that Uwe Boll, a man whose name is as synonymous with low-quality filmmaking as Ed Wood or Tommy Wiseau, is largely known for adapting video games, should tell you something about how well-regarded this particular medium transfer is. And since I like both mediums and have a YouTube channel, it was inevitable that I would try to pick apart the tired question of why aren't there good video game movies? So, because I'm incapable of structuring a video essay without explicitly announcing how it's going to be segmented, let's start with the very basics of basicness. We need to understand adaptation. Actually, scratch that. That's too obvious. We need to understand categorization. Of particular relevance to us today are the categorizations of genre and medium. In day-to-day practice, genre is most often understood as a set of trappings that, when gathered together, allow even the most unseasoned of artistic connoisseurs to latch onto a broad category into which a given work falls. Now, I could sit here and tell you about all the ways you can immediately tell this could go wrong. How the modern video game scene has boiled down the role-playing elements of RPGs down to a set of reward unlocking statistics, how expectation of certain genre can unfairly slant a general opinion when that genre isn't delivered, how debates over whether such and such falls into whatever category can provide some of the most fruitless and pointless scrabbles at any kind of criticism, but I'm not going to do that, because I just said everything I wanted to say about those topics in that one run-on sentence. But yeah, the general unspoken understanding of genre as a thing to lead off recommendations with and squabble over on Wikia is technically fine and useful for conversational shorthand, and absolutely horrific for actual artistic analysis. This is usually where I would say something like, genres should be general emotional palettes and not collections of trappings. But, in a startling twist, I completely agree with that statement. Actually, maybe not completely, because even that's a bit too rigid for me. The Room, for example, is objectively a drama, but the most popular reading of it is comedic. Tying something down to one clear emotional state and throwing out any other alternative interpretations, it's generally a red flag, just a heads up. But, my stupid digressions aside, genre is the combination of tone, technique, ideas, general or personal associations, and kinesthetics that ultimately produce what I'm going to continue reductively referring to as an emotional palette, works well enough for the purposes of understanding why we have such a problem with video game movie adaptations. Even though there are no medium transfers that have anything other than a dodgy track record overall, book-to-movie adaptations are probably the most consistently respected one in the modern day, which kinda makes sense and kinda makes no sense at all. On one hand, books are a spectral medium, like movies, and pairing them with visuals has been a thing for as long as Illustrator has been an occupation. Movies are a medium of audio and visuals, and get across in those senses very quickly what might take longer to convey in a piece of writing. And sure, that's only two senses, but they're two of the most powerful and versatile senses, especially for storytelling. Technically, they're the oldest senses used for storytelling. On the other hand, there's a ton of difficulties with adapting books. Books are uniformly go at your own pace, flip back if you forgot something affairs, while movies are meant to be consumed and understood in a single sitting, usually, with a lot more attention paid to making sure the audience is reminded what's going on. That's why we have things like the rule of three set up in screenwriting. Books don't have a lot of concrete viscera like movies do, but in their abstractness, they go places that are literally impossible in movies. You could probably make a movie version of Finnegan's Wake, but you wouldn't be able to completely preserve the experience of messing around with language. Books have far fewer length constraints and legal boundaries than movies, and don't need to sell nearly as much to be considered a success, leaving the market wide open for more niche interests. That's just one example of a medium transfer, and it's one that has still produced the most classics and gets the most respect. Why? I would posit that at least part of it is that we've had so much longer to figure out how to do it. Books have been around for far longer than movies, and they've been dissected and studied and mutilated for longer than most mediums. Video games have no such luxury, and this leads to two problems. Firstly, a lot of video games borrow liberally from the trappings and tropes of film, meaning that the more obviously cinematic games that might make obvious choices for adaptation would gain absolutely nothing from being turned into movies, because they already have those movie elements, and a ton of their own besides that movies can't match. Secondly, most filmmakers simply haven't worked out video games as a medium yet and how their emotional palettes work. Combine this with wonderful sub-problems, like the fact that the first image an executive is likely to have of a self-identified gamer probably isn't going to inspire artistic respect, or how games in general, and big-budget games especially, have been so uniformly tied down to the broad idea of being fun that browsing GameStop feels like the video game version of a Netflix with nothing but popcorn action movies, and you have an even more tumultuous concoction than most medium transfers. So what's so hard to adapt? Well, everything, really. The way you experience an interactive emotional palette directly places you in the role of a creator and an artist because you provide the input and you make the work complete. A lot of tools used to evoke an emotion in a participant aren't nearly the same as the tools used to evoke emotion in a spectator. A player and a member of a crowd can both have very exciting or tense experiences at a sports match, but of different flavors and for far different reasons. So, how do you take an emotional state but with a largely different and untransferable set of tools into another? Well, that's the problem. Most people who make video game movies don't even consider that. They're more concerned with adapting the story and the iconography of the game than how it actually feels to play. That's why so many video game adaptations are action or horror, because we've already figured out how to do those things on film. But again, instead of adapting the specific experience of horror found in something like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, the broadest possible nods are given and not much else. The obvious objection is to question how much interaction can really convey besides excitement, especially since the vast majority of games are based around combat in some form or another. Maybe interaction is just a more limited palette, and the only source of true emotional reaction to a video game is in the presentation, the story, the writing, the visual design, the audio. The play and the narrative are separate things, so we should treat them as such. This is a really frustrating dichotomy that pops up a lot in video game discussion, even though it doesn't actually happen in academia. So here's some counter words. Goat Simulator is a comedy, not just in the way that it's skinned, though that certainly adds to it, but in the way that the physics engine works and how the only goal of the game is to amuse yourself by breaking it as much as possible. In other words, it's a playable absurdist comedy. I Want to Be the Guy doesn't just rip visuals and audio from the 8-bit Nintendo hard era of games, it takes every cheap level design trick in the fresh from the arcade's NES designer handbook and ramps them up to ridiculous levels, applying explicit attention to how a player-unfriendly every screen is and how every design choice seems to have been made to be as frustrating yet amusing as possible. In other words, it's a playable satire. Spec Ops: The Line has a fleshed-out narrative, undeniably, showing how horrific the blind order following and unquestionably drawn racial and national lines of modern military shooters are when taken to their logical extremes, but it wouldn't be nearly as effective if it didn't specifically bring you, the player, into it, by not only making you do horrible things, but by doing so with the veil of exactly the kind of third-person shooter mechanics and over-the-top presentation that most players would be totally comfortable with otherwise. In other words, it's a playable, artistic, and political deconstruction. Even Undertale uses mechanics that are skeletal at best to point out the cold, mechanical frivolity of so many RPG systems, directly asking you what's more important to you in a gaming experience, just seeing some numbers go up or getting invested in a genuinely warm, empathic, and charming story. All of these games substantially lose something when you take the interaction out. Their play is an integral part of their narrative, and they're far from the only examples. So if spectral emotions can be made interactive, then why can't interactive emotions be made spectral? Well, actually, they can. Okay, full on, upfront, I don't know very much about anime at all. I could definitely see that changing, but for right now, my knowledge is very limited. I do like some stuff, though. My favorite characters are Kenny and Bleach Boy, like from the show Bleach. I really like the shows Spicy Wolf and Wrath of the Titans and Five Finger Death Punch. Death Note. Okay, so I actually don't know anything about anime. I hope I don't need to, but if that invalidates anything I'm about to say, sorry, I guess. But anyway, the movie. So yeah, there was a movie based on Animal Crossing, the cute animal game where you do cute animal things. Isn't it cute? And yeah, the cuteness is a big part of it. But why Animal Crossing really excels and why it's such a gripping experience for so many people is because it's so low-key and low stakes. There's no daily quest, but it's very easy to form a daily routine. A lot of Animal Crossing is ultimately monotonous busy work, gathering money to spruce up your house or your appearance or your town. It's a simulation of life, like in The Sims, but oddly idealized. Anything you could want to spend money on is optional. You technically have no financial obligations whatsoever. There's no pressure in the world of Animal Crossing, just lazily drifting from one quirky conversation, odd delivery job, daily map scour, house redecoration, and shopping spree to the next. That, by all rights, should be infinitely harder to adapt than something as straightforward as a story about killing zombies, but here we are. Watching the Animal Crossing movie feels very much like playing the game. It's a series of subplots and distractions and little episodes. Are they cute? A lot of them, yeah, but just as many of them get across as surprisingly thoughtful and moving moments that can come from playing Animal Crossing, from a particularly interesting conversation to a friend suddenly moving away. It has almost no broad thematic points to make, though it is interested in a number of subjects. The closest to a main thread being the use of one's talents and the tragedy of letting them lie dormant, even if following them provides difficulties. Searching for a meaning, a thread, a deeper connection in a series of randomly picked pre-written conversations and already set up systems is something that everyone who's invested a lot of time in Animal Crossing has probably done. And the movie is able to go one further by actually making it fully scripted and planned out and detailed instead of basically procedural. It's not as personal as the stories we'll get from actually playing Animal Crossing, but it very well could be an Animal Crossing playthrough with all the things you read into it brought to the forefront. Has that guy ever really forgiven you for trampling his flowers? Did your close friend do anything meaningful after they moved away? Are you sure that some of those citizens haven't been an item at some point? The whole mindset is probably the closest thing the movie has to a big arc. It's not even getting into all the minor things that are thrown out on a presentational level that just rings so wonderfully for someone who spent time with the game. A conversation about rain with Cap'n, bringing clothing designs to the Able sisters, spiders falling from trees, hitting people on the head with a bug net, trampling flowers, the existence of a local fruit, shaking trees to get that fruit, finding stuff on the seashore, designed papers for letters, corresponding with Mom, Pascal the philosophical wandering otter, KK Slider acknowledging how the place he plays his music has changed from game to game, keeping his gibberish singing by adding honest to God lyrics to one of the best songs in the game, Red selling overpriced garbage, fun with pitballs, the hungry walrus dude, the UFO, all the little expressions. This is perfect. Ah! There's just tons of wonderful moments. The KK Bossa montage that made me cry when I was 12, the B-plot of the mayor being concerned about an election that no one else cares about. Basically every conversation Margie, or Sally if you're Japanese, is involved in, just how casually thoughtful and earnest and charming they are as pieces of writing, how Mr. Rossetti is now like this peacekeeper dude, this scene... Honestly, the moments where the movie kind of loses steam are the moments where it goes for more of a straightforward adventure story in the middle and the very end, but even those aren't treated as a plot thrust and more of a catalyst for other small moments of charm and feels and cuteness and all sorts of other wholesome stuff. And all of this in the very recognizable tradition of Animal Crossing. How is it that we live in a world where Animal Crossing gets a spot-on movie adaptation before inherently cinematic stuff like Call of Duty or Uncharted or Assassin's Creed? I don't know, but here we are, a movie that's really only matched by Amelie in terms of a celebration of the ultimately insignificant. And that's kinda it. It's a simple, straightforward, wonderful little movie. It pays attention to the meditative and casual tone of the original games and matches it beautifully in a way more medium adaptations definitely could if they just dug deeper than the surface level of what they're adapting. It's as compulsively watchable as a piece of entertainment as it is inspiring and motivating as an adaptation. To close out, I want to make it clear that this particular approach isn't a catch-all. You can make a good adaptation even by eviscerating your source material rather than idealizing it. You shouldn't swap one lazy template for another, even if it's a subversive one. Don't do something just because you think it'll be unexpected, especially when you've already done 2 abrupt ending jokes in a row.